to just capture which areas we're from. Right, over to you, Simon Duffy.
Okay, well, yes. So it would be good if people introduce themselves. We're not suited, but yeah, let's crack on because we lost a few minutes. And today's agenda is quite straightforward, I think. I was going to give a little bit of a catch up on the neighbourhood care concept, which, and I think this is our third session as doing this commissioning on neighbourhood care as part of the Self-Directed Support Network for England. So I'm really pleased to see people here, and I'm really grateful for Claire and Chris's support in making this happen. The concept of neighbourhood care is, in a way, it's an old concept. It isn't a new concept. And I was on a call yesterday with folk talking, folk even older than me who were talking about this is how it used to be, where people worked locally, supported each other locally. There was a lot of local knowledge, and they were talking about neighbourhoods in Sheffield back in the 70s, and we lost a lot of that approach. And as we were just talking about in Doncaster, we're seeing the emergence of neighbourhood care in communities. So in a way, commissioning for neighbourhood care is about really thinking about how can we get back to some of these basic principles of good community life. How can we support the creative things that communities are trying to do? And how can we rethink the way money and services are deployed across our communities and at a neighbourhood level? And so it is, in a sense, the beginning of an inquiry. I don't feel like in any sense, this is quite different to me to maybe when we started the Self-Directed Support Network, where you could point to 50 years of practice, and you can point to international developments. It feels like, well, we've kind of forgotten important things. We probably need to either remember them or be creative, maybe a mixture of the two, to bring about the changes we need. But there does feel like something's happening. If you even half awake in the policy sphere, you see things from the NHS, from the LGA, even from central government itself, constantly now talking about neighbourhoods. So maybe people aren't always talking about the same thing when they talk about neighbourhoods, and there's different things going on. But this seems like a great time to start getting our act together, to start thinking as practitioners at different levels. What do we really mean? What can we learn from each other? And that's what this network's for. Chris, Claire, does that seem a fair summary of? Yeah. Sorry. So, and my job was to both introduce Simon, who's going to be our main speaker, give Simon a good chance to explain some of the really exciting work. I was lucky enough to hear Simon when he came to Sheffield for the Fearless Cities summit that we ran in November. 400 people came to Sheffield to explore these and connected issues around neighbourhoods back in November last year. So I'm really looking forward to hearing Simon again. We didn't give him much time. Last time was a little bit more time. I think there's loads more to discover. But I was also going to give people a little bit of a heads up on one of the things that I've mentioned in the last two sessions, which is really this development of a strategy for South Yorkshire, which is where I am based. These ideas are all up for grabs. They're all in development, but I mean, it is interesting that we have seen some really positive developments, and I'll just try and sketch a few of those. And I've got some slides. I'm always a bit nervous in slide share on Teams. How do I do it? Can I even do it? How do you do slides on Teams? I'm such a Zooms. Oh, there it is. Share. Let me see if I can do these slides as well. There's not many, but can you see this slide? A kind of.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So the concept of neighbourhood care is rooted in the idea that the good things that happen, the things that we want to have happen, are basically things created by citizens. Not just in the ordinary sense of like people who are citizens of a place, but people who start behaving like citizens. So for Citizen Network, we have this strong sense that we've got to be really waking up to our own citizenship and supporting each other to be citizens. And the natural place for citizen action is the neighbourhood. And I think this is the thing that in a lot of places we've forgotten. We've forgotten that the small communities, and by neighbourhood, I typically mean about maybe 4,000 or 5,000 people. Again, although there's no strong science, that's kind of what the community development world tells us is a good functioning neighbourhood. So those kind of relatively small neighbourhoods are critical for people engaging as citizens. But if you think about this in an ecological sense, then you need to pay attention to all the other conditions of which you as commissioners, for instance, can have a significant influence on the nature of civil society in those places, the way community services are organised, the bedrock of universal public services, democracy, social and economic justice, and even democracy in its constitutional sense. And again, a lot of these things are not directly in our control, but there are quite a lot of things where we probably have a lot more slack than we realise. And so the South Yorkshire Neighbourhood Care Strategy is basically an attempt to get the 4 local authorities of South Yorkshire, which is Sheffield, Rotherham, Doncaster and Barnsley, all learning from each other. One of the nice developments, actually, I just got this yesterday, it's not quite complete, but one of our allies is Tom French, who runs an organisation called Data for Action. And one of the things we did in Sheffield is we started to map the neighbourhoods using citizens themselves and their own sense of neighbourhood. So down in that, you'll see on the map there, Sheffield's now got a lot of neighbourhoods identified, 147 in fact. Now, interestingly, Sheffield, the city, has rather struggled to acknowledge the existence of neighbourhoods. But one of the pieces of work that I've just been asked to lead in Sheffield now is to establish some form of neighbourhood governance for the future as part of a bigger project called Sheffield City Goals. So we're starting to see a real acknowledgement by the council, by the NHS and by other big organisations in Sheffield of the importance of neighbourhoods. Now, Barnsley and Rotherham have actually been sticking at this, particularly Barnsley, for a lot longer. So Barnsley's been doing really interesting work, but it has used electoral wards as its neighbourhoods, which are much bigger, containing 3 or 4 neighbourhoods, but nevertheless has been doing really impressive work. And so has Doncaster, but we haven't, and they actually have identified 88 neighbourhoods, so much closer to the Sheffield kind of proportions, but I just haven't got the geospatial data from my friends in Doncaster yet, so we'll get that in the next week or so, I hope. The kind of thing that this throws up, and this is the kind of thing I think commissioners might want to start thinking about. If you think about a neighbourhood at this kind of scale, and this is just in Sheffield, so of course things will vary a little bit, but you can see that what we're talking about is still quite substantial in service terms. So it looks like the spending in a neighbourhood would, and again I've used national data here rather than Sheffield data, but the average spending per neighbourhood would be about 3.4 million. NHS spending would be 14 million, and education 10.5. And by work, I mean that what the DWP, I think, rather wastes on its work programme, which is equivalent to £200,000 per neighbourhood. Now, so one of the challenges we need to start thinking about, one of the things that driving support for this strategy in South Yorkshire at least, is a recognition that there's a huge economic impact of doing this right, that many of the communities that are disadvantaged at the moment would be much better off if more of that public sector spending was both organised and spent inside the neighbourhood. Now, currently, just to give you a flavour of this, if you take the social care spending, over half of it doesn't get spent in the neighbourhood, it gets spent on residential care taking people out of their neighbourhood. And even the funding on social care, a lot of it is spent on things like domiciliary care and day centres, which involve lots of travel, distance, don't really invest back in the neighbourhoods where people live, don't grow relationships, don't actually lead to better working conditions for staff who aren't forced to travel all over the place. And again, there's a huge gender issue here because paid and unpaid carers are overwhelmingly women. And so there's a huge gender injustice created by the current social care system. What we've been doing, and apologies to Simon S, because I still haven't published this after the Fearless Cities event, and there's it's been a busy couple of months. But what we've been trying to do is identify, in a sense, what's the strategic framework for creative action. And so this is like an early model, as I see it. I don't think we're anywhere close to really understanding all the things we need to think about. But what I've been exploring is this attempt to think about kind of spatial model for neighbourhoods, in the sense that we're not looking for a kind of mechanical process to make neighbourhoods better, because in a way that takes away people's capacity to think of themselves as active citizens. We're trying to identify the kind of spaces people need in order to, the spaces, the structures, the roles, the resources that will enable the kind of creative action that Simon just mentioned he can see happening in the neighbourhood of Intake in Doncaster. So I won't go through all of this, but it gives you a sense of, even in our early work, we're identifying such a fantastic range of possible forms of action. I don't think there's really any limit to this. And I'll just end with a couple of things that are going on. So actually, thanks to Chris, we brought together service providers in Sheffield the other week. And one of the strategies we need to really be thinking about, and it's the one here identified under number 7, a neighbourhood approach has many, many attractions, but because we've taken service providers further and further away from neighbourhoods, it's going to really be important to help them find their role in this world. Although if we can't, then they become a source of resistance to these approaches. So we're really interested in how service providers can actually network and start to think about themselves as belonging more to neighbourhoods. I think I'm just going to finish that there and just stop sharing. Am I back? So I think this is there are loads of things, and this isn't the time to rehearse it, but I think it's one of the things to think about, and it's a particularly relevant thing for commissioners, isn't it? Because the system has created a system where since I started in this work I started my career in 1988. I'm feeling a little bit old. I turned 60 last year, so I've been in this work for over 30 years. And you've seen organisations effectively move away from community to win contracts, to succeed in a procurement environment that rewards people who are organised to win contracts. And actually that's attenuated their relationship to neighbourhoods, to communities, to places. It means resources themselves tend to then float off to offices in London or other places as well. Leadership floats off. But I don't think we should be blaming service providers for this. This is a system they didn't create. And we need all the people, and we need much of the talent that's kind of built into service providers. We need people with some experience and expertise, but we need them to start thinking differently about how that's delivered. I think one of the other interesting bits of data is that when you think about how many people are eligible for social care, putting children and adults together, per neighbourhood, it's about 150 people. I don't know about you, but to me that suggests that if we're serious about this, there are real questions about why we've separated adult social care from children's social care, and why adult social care is then broken into lots of silos, because it's going to be very difficult for all of those silos to be effective at a neighbourhood level. What we probably need to do is still maintain expertise, differential expertise, but have much more feet on the ground that are really thinking in terms of the whole community, the whole family, are able to work with people with different complex overlapping needs. Because partially what we're trying to do is also get the whole community thinking like that. The community isn't going to break itself into the learning disability bit of the community, is it? It's not, we don't want it to, etc., etc. So we've started to think about in Sheffield getting the service providers to map where they're strong, where they're supporting people, but also where their staff are, which may not be the same thing. And then starting to think about how we might use that data to help service providers work differently with neighbourhoods, because we certainly can't have them all competing for a procurement in intake or wherever. It's mad. Doesn't make any sense. So we need to get back to something much more natural and less competitive and more effective. And that means that commissioners then have a really critical strategic role in driving that process forward. Sorry, so that was a little kind of a whirlwind tour of some of those developments. But how are we doing for time? Claire, do you think, is it worth just opening up a few questions and then moving on to Simon on that?
Yeah.
Has anybody got any kind of immediate response to just those thoughts? And I mean, Simon, yourself, you might want to respond, because these are things you'll have. I mean, we're a commissioner too, so you know all about this too. I don't know. Any thoughts? Horror struck or excited?
Matt's got a question, Simon.
Pat.
It's really great kind of seeing all of it laid out like that. And the figures are quite compelling, aren't they? So it was just right at the end there, I was like, as I guess, so my reaction was, we can start to observe all these different roles, and we can start to observe the fact that if you split services down too much, they just don't kind of work in a neighbourhood, because they're just too fragmented and there's not enough people to kind of do the work. But then I think our kind of natural kind of next step is to try and solutionize into that space and kind of say, this is how it needs to kind of look. But I'm not sure that works. I think it gets you into the kind of top-down planning sort of state and mindset. And so I wonder, in terms of how we think about, okay, we're at our start point. We know that there's some things that don't work, but the process of change in itself is part of the solution. So what's that process to get from now into the future, where you're unlocking and unleashing all of that? So it's basically, let's apply community development to pretty much everything, in terms of how you get from where we are now to where we want to be, and using all those observations you've made as a kind of, this is why we know it's not working, and this is why we know it's not working, and what we don't know is exactly what the format would be. I don't know whether that kind of helps or.
No, I mean, I think it's spot on. I mean, there's the complexity of neighbourhoods themselves, their gifts, their needs, but then there's complexity, like I think about it in this kind of layered way, and there's plenty of work for us to all do. One of the things we need to avoid doing is assuming somebody's in charge, because I do tend to think about this ecologically. Like in a garden, I know I've got a role, but the soil's doing most of the work. Things I can't control are doing the work, and the plants are reacting in different ways. And I know that sounds a bit funny, but I think it's helpful to try and position yourself with less power into this, and also recognise, I mean, again, Simon will have seen this in Doncaster. What PFG don't do is ask permission. And what citizens should do is not ask permission. So we need to be creating a sense of an enabled environment. But we, if I mean, the we here is complex even in this group, but let's think about it from the respect of particularly local government, the NHS, and this kind of commissioning role. The signals we send are very important. The way resources turn up in these communities is very important. And we have a role, like a kind of gardening role, but it has to be sensitive in the way that you say, Matt. And I mean, the good news is, like gardening, stuff happens, and what you really have to do a lot of the time is not get in its way. You have to spot that it's good. You do have to look out for the poisons that you might be putting onto the soil, or the weeds that are growing up and that you really don't want. So I think a kind of ecological approach combined with, as you say, like appreciative inquiry, community development approach is the way forward. At the moment, I was very excited in Sheffield just to watch service providers with very little prompting immediately go, oh, well, we could do this, we could do that. And now this is like not the model we've been promoting for 30 or 40 years, but it's natural because people want to do a good job and they can see the case for working differently. So work with that rather than boss people around or think that some new system is going to resolve it, because there will be tricky points on this journey. There will be points of conflict and tension, and which particularly commissioners will have to make key decisions in a democratic system about priorities, to be frank. Like a garden, there are points where you end up chopping a tree down. But yeah, I think that's exactly right. The headset we need is the one you described, Matt. Yeah. Simon, did you want to come in? You had your hand up there, I think, as well.
No, I think because I'll weave it into what I might say in a minute. Really, I don't want to spoil it because I haven't worked out exactly what I'm going to say yet. But
anyone else?
Stephen has made a comment. He's commented that he agrees with Matt and says our colleagues in procurement are seeing the answer to neighbourhood community care as let's tender and have a single provider in each community.
Yeah, so I think this is like getting ahead of the game a bit, isn't it? If we're not careful, and you know, these some of this is about a spirit of citizenship running right through everything, isn't it? So let's stop that hierarchical thing, not ignoring our responsibilities in our work, but you know, who are the community organisations in the place you are? I mean, in a way, there are some exclusions. I say, like, if this is an American hedge fund organisation, you don't want it. So stop opening up your community to them. But the people who really belong to your community, start bringing them into the conversation. How are we going to crack this? What's your vision? I think those are the kind of conversations we want, absolutely. And you'll get people's energy and creativity, and the fact that all of those people are pretty much will be citizens of the place itself. Like, they'll care how their neighbourhood works because it affects them, their parents, their children. That's what we've got to be using.
But maybe I will say one thing then, Simon, if I may. Yesterday I went to a place called Stainforth, sort of east of Doncaster, and there's been sort of, you know, purposeful work and nurturing of community-led activity there for some years now. And this is just one little bit of it, but I suppose what it shows, I guess, is if you're tending or nurturing the garden, as Simon said. So there was a lady whose name I think I've forgotten. It might be Rachel. When she first got involved, she was 16. She had quite a lot of issues around anxiety, and that had actually affected other parts of her health. If I was to wind the story to now, they're slightly kind of like grieving for the loss of Rachel because she's now just joined Children's Services as a family intervention worker. So actually, she started off as she became a kind of an apprentice in the community-led work there, and was nurtured and supported by workers from Well Doncaster and the local community people. And another one where we ended up having a little hug and a cry in a hairdresser's in Stainforth on the main street there. And actually, it was the daughter of one of the ladies I'd met earlier, who'd only started getting involved in community in later life and was now leading the Friends of the local park. But that hairdresser, when we were talking in the hairdressers, and there was about 8 or 9 other ladies there, all either doing nails or hair cutting or whatever, and she'd trained every single one of them. So it wasn't just a hairdresser. She had trained, then become a trainer herself, then trained all of them, and they were talking about how they were opening up the back of the building to actually do sort of for teenagers. There's a lot of teenagers that are struggling, in that area with educational attainment and, but actually would really love to start to get some training around hairdressing and being a beautician. And so this lady was creating that opportunity so that when they got to the next phase of college, actually had some sort of, experience and qualification to enable them to get to the next bit. So it's like, how are you nurturing from within your community the ability to self-support your community? It's lovely.
Brilliant. So, but on that note, Claire, unless there's anything else, I can't see anything else. Claire, did you spot anything anybody wanted to say?
It's just some comments in the chat. Matt's just included. This points to not just talk about the issues we face, not just about the potential vision, but about how we see change happen. That speaks to a choice we need to make about our human capacity. Do we believe one group of people must have to control another group of people? But by the way, this is the common law definition of employment, or believe people can self-direct and self-organise around the issues that matter to them. The two beliefs end up in different places.
That's a nice point, isn't it? I suppose it brings us back to the kind of strange circle of self-direction here, doesn't it? Because we're, for me, like self-direction and personal budgets and all these systems remain critical components. But I've always seen it as supporting people to be citizens. And one of the things we've seen sometimes is how self-direction gets distorted back into actually a control mechanism, where we define what people's outcomes are, and we start all sorts of weird shit. Sorry to put it like that, but it's actually just allowing human beings to be human and get on with their lives and contribute and expect contribution. So we need to apply that logic actually to our approach to community buildings. Lovely point, isn't it? I bang on about that as well, Matt, about employment. It's a very weird thing, isn't it? It's basically based on slavery. Yeah. But hey ho, let's not get distracted by the legacy of Roman law on our thinking, and let's welcome Simon to tell us about what you've been doing, what you're thinking, and why it might be relevant to folk here. Simon, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I suspect it looks, Claire, like you might be the person who just sort of makes sure the wheels don't fall off the bus, as it were. I am a terrible talker, so you're probably going to need to do a klaxon or something, because I'll probably run over whatever I was supposed to do.
Okey-doke.
All right, so just give me a couple of minutes to wrap up if I'm still waffling. Thank you very much for the opportunity to come and share, and then to maybe hear some of other people's sharings. As Simon said, I did have the honour and the privilege of being at Fearless Cities and being able to contribute a bit to that concept of neighbourhoods of care. And the bit that's really I've held on to from all of that, because it resonated with the kind of journey I've been involved in for sort of over 10 years now, which was a neighbourhood that cares for ourselves, each other, and the planet. So that was the sort of strapline that Simon framed those conversations with. And that really speaks to me. That speaks to me personally. It speaks to the work I've been involved in. And a bit like probably lots of people on this call, trying to find a better way for us to to be together for the benefit of ourselves, each other, and our planet. And I agree with Simon that I think the neighbourhood is the place to start and build out from. And I've had some experience and some privilege to be able to be involved in that. And that's the story I'm going to tell you, which is kind of over 10 years. I'm going to try and use a bit of a Pekakucha type approach. So it's going to be rapid fire. I won't be able to see anyone, so I won't comment on anything until the end. Yeah. And also maybe I should just put some slides up, and I won't see anything then on my screen, just so you know. So I can't even see your reactions to whether you're even engaged, interested, bored stiff, or whatever. So it's a little roller coaster storytell. Here we go. He said confidently. Where's that slide deck gone? Oh, that's not it. Good start.
We saw it and then it disappeared.
Yeah, it wasn't the right thing.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep, that's come through. We can see the slides down the side though at the minute.
Yeah. I'm trying to click the button. Oh my God. I'm trying to click the slideshow button. Okay. So I think we're there now.
Yeah.
And graphics, not my forte, apologies. So just by way of introduction, you've heard from the other bearded guy called Matt, who's the other half of Spindle CIC. And we created Spindle CIC as a sort of trading arm of two local charities, Torbay Communities and Plymouth Octopus, or known as POP, and its community tentacles. It kind of says on the tin what we think we're about. We think we're peer learners. We've been learning in this space for some years, and now we like to share that learning and learn from other places as we share out that learning. And we're currently commissioned by the Local Government Association and ADAS under the Partners in Care and Health stream. And that's the sort of finale of where I'll get the story to, which is why I'm in Doncaster, to learn more about and support and advise around how we move to a more neighbourhood focused model where communities are in the lead. So that's the storytelling. So most of the story is kind of based in Torbay. We had a failing CVS in Torbay. I actually killed it. That's a longer story. I haven't got time for that. And we set up something called Torbay Communities, it's now called, with these aspirations, which was all about bringing people together across the three towns of Torbay, across sectors, but we wanted to start in neighbourhoods. We were very fortunate. We worked very hard for it, but we were one of the National Lottery's Ageing Better sites. So we were testing and learning how to alleviate social isolation and loneliness for people over 50, which apparently are older people. I've not met anyone who's admitted to it yet. I've met a lot of people. So the bedrock of our approach was a team of community builders. Here's 4 of them. They're all still there. I think they've been, it's 13 years on now. And in the words of Cormac Russell from Nurture Development, it takes 25 years to transform a community. So we're sort of halfway there in Torbay at 13 years. These guys are based in populations of around the 5,000 mark, so between 4,000 and 8,000. They spend 80% of their time out in the community. Lots of people within our own organisation, and we're a local community development trust and a CVS. We're kind of like, well, what do these people do? All they seem to do is drink tea and cups of coffee. They don't really do proper work, do they? So actually trying to move to a more enabling, community-focused approach was actually more difficult than we thought. But I was committed to it as the sort of leader of the organisation, and we then got this lottery money, which enabled us to have sustained approach to this. It ended up being over 7 years. So we had 15 of those guys who were trying to support this kind of stuff, the community driving their own vehicle. Lots of people, because we called these people community builders, we had to have symbolism like this, because we're not Bob the Builder. We're not there with a toolkit trying to fix roofs. It was about, maybe we should have said building connection in community. And this, like all schematics, it doesn't tell the whole picture, but what the community builder's sort of role was to go out into the community to build relationships and build trust through visibility. And maybe that's partly why it needs to be a small enough neighbourhood, because it's about visibility. If people see you for long enough, they come to trust you. If you're a person who reaches out and listens and connects people around shared interests, shared aspiration, things they care about, you become a part of that community. And the only way for this sort of work to happen successfully is for you to bring yourself into relationship. It's not like a job description with a role and I'm ticking boxes. People know when you don't really care and you're not really interested. You have to bring yourself. It's quite an ask. And we supported this team of 15 full-time equivalents. We brought in mentors, we had coaching, we had all sorts of support to enable that team to walk happy and strong. Even the way we recruited the people was different. We didn't rely on interviews. Maybe that could be in the question a bit later if anyone's interested. There are other ways of doing this work, and I'll come on to that at the end, or maybe in the questions. But we used asset-based community development. We tried all sorts of other tools that are part of that toolkit, like time banking, which is still running, is still successful, ideas fairs, pop-ups, all sorts of wonderful things. And it worked. I guess that's a sort of, we tried to articulate what it was, and I guess you'll get these slides. So that was our kind of like little sort of, we call it the Torbay way, because we wanted to build pride in what we were doing in our place. Won't go into all of it, but you can see it there. I guess this comes from Cormac. The top two bits, and this isn't to denigrate in any way, as Simon said, I spent 11 years in Torbay Council. I was a strategic commissioner of adult social care, supporting people. I was a strategic lead for housing services. And then I was asked to develop and support the community and voluntary sector with no budget. That was the point where I thought, actually, I can't do this anymore, and I need to find a different way to try and serve community. And that's why I ended up going out and, slightly by accident, setting up this organisation and then landing this resource with a bunch of other amazing people to create change in community. So I was the gapper in this model down here. And my job actually was probably to keep, so that bit in the chat about procurement and we'll procure a provider. Well, I can tell you, I'm currently working with Barking and Dagenham. They tried that. It was an unmitigated disaster. They've completely reframed and changed the way they're trying to work in neighbourhoods, having tried that very approach unsuccessfully. Trying to shift service provision to enabling and getting participation is harder than you think. So we need to be very careful about how we go about that. The gapper's role is partly to keep services away while you're building up the confidence of local citizens. In our case, we're working with some quite vulnerable people who are quite isolated and lonely. We need to build up their confidence to the point where they could meet agencies as equals. So the gapper role is kind of important. So the kind of historic model where we think we're here to fix people, is to commission support services for people. And some of that we actually involved the people in all stages of that commissioning process, including mystery shopping. So they're involved in the strategizing, the specking, the selection, and the monitoring, and so on. So I think that's one way that you can sort of mitigate if it's a bit more co-productive, or co-creation, you're going to get a kind of more rounded approach to how you do things to people and move that a bit further to the with bit. One of the things we didn't expect but was quite interesting. And people talk about the VCF as or the third sector or the voluntary sector. A bit like saying the public sector, isn't it? It's quite a loose kind of term. Having worked in it for over a decade, as has Matt, I think there's community. There are community groups. There's residents. There are community groups that are registered charities, unincorporated groups, social enterprises, community interest companies. So there's a whole range and a flavour there. But I suppose why charity kind of emerged was to help meet needs, to do things for people that were in need. So with the 2 and the 4 at the top there is a danger that we maintain dependency. We only see a person as a problem that needs to be fixed. But the reality for us, particularly working around isolation and loneliness, and we came across lots of other things, of course, around mental health and so on. Actually, if we think we're the answer to the solution, we're not actually. And we got this from primary care often. It's like, well, lots of the people that come in to see us, they don't need a GP. It's psychosocial issues. We found in our model, which could be boiled down to 2 words, which very much speaks back, I think, to the neighbourhoods of care philosophy. It was value and purpose. What we observed and witnessed in our learning was that people who were living a great later life, living their best life maybe, were active, involved, they felt valued from within themselves, from those around them, and they had some kind of purpose in their lives that gave them that sense of value. And people that didn't have those 2 things were often those people who were isolated and lonely and struggling with other issues. So the philosophy of our program was about how do we nurture value and purpose. And so here's a lovely group, the Torbay Yarn Bombers. And there is a little video clip somewhere in here. So the lady just there, that's Robbie. This is Nina, the community builder. Geisha here, she also runs the Neighbourhood magazine, as well as being part of the Yarn Bombers. They do lots, but it's not so much about the knitting, if you like, and the yarn, although I think it's really lovely and important. It's the networks, the support, the connections that happen. And in here, built into the slide deck, is a little video clip from Robbie. We did a time lapse for Robbie, who used to work on the trains. She did nights in Exeter, about 40 minutes away from Paynton, where she lived, and didn't really know her neighbours as a result. She was laid off on the sick, as she called it, and she went to the GP and she was on the number. She was feeling really miserable, staring at the wall. And then the job centre started to get on her back, she called it, because, even though she was off on the sick, as she called it, they were starting to hassle her about having to do all that sort of business. She got really low. And then she met Nina, the community builder, and then she got involved in the time bank, and then she got involved in helping set up Torbay Yarn Bombers. And when you look at her, it was a 4-year difference. So we did the initial bit. She looked pretty low. The place looked we videoed her in her home, looked pretty shabby, not really cared for. And then we saw her 4 years later. We did another segment, and she looked about 10 years younger. She was now leading the community, the Yarn Bombers. She said, "I never get a taxi. One of my network will always give me an appointment," because she has enduring long-term health conditions. But she's living her best life because she's valued, purposeful, and trying all sorts of new things. She's getting into doing shabby chic and all sorts of other things now. So I guess this is like the examples that I've just witnessed in Doncaster. When you enable people to flourish together, to be valued and purposeful, actually they create the networks of support they need to live their best lives. But it doesn't mean we don't need services. I would absolutely agree. That's the video of Robbie there. And this lovely gentleman here, we had the most wonderful letter from his daughter. He'd become very low and isolated. But the opportunity to renew and restore tools and use his skills again in the shed, it's not a man shed because women are allowed to, was transformational for his later years. Another example. we ended up becoming a bus company. It almost broke us, but we did it because our hearts were big, and all these people, you know, there was a bus service that stopped because it was no longer viable. Torbay's lots of hills with lots of older people come to retire on the hills in bungalows, and one particular area, the bus stops, and all these people couldn't get into town at all. So there we are doing a project around isolation and loneliness. So we ended up starting up a bus company. We learnt a lot. In the end, it became a sort of subsidised thing called our bus. All the people were eligible for concessionary fares, but the only way we could actually run it effectively was with a smaller bus, not this one, we got rid of this one, and a volunteer driver, if enough people became like subscribers of the concept of our bus and paid a weekly subscription to have a bus. So again, it was only because we went out, we reached out, we built on the relationships we have with those people and worked up a scheme with them that they felt they could endorse and support financially, that they were able to have a bus service. So again, it was that very collaborative approach to working with them. If we didn't have the relationships, we never would have been able to provide something for them. But I guess it was with them because it was their bus, it's our bus. That's the platform that we hosted the time bank on, but it also does all sorts of other things. You can crowdsource for events and all sorts of other things. So we had a platform in the middle that helped connect people, described all the things that were available, contacted people. You could create peer groups and all sorts on it, and do volunteering, that sort of stuff. So we put some of the gubbins, if you like, in the middle. That was all again about nurturing connection, bringing people together. Moving more into the sort of service space, and this is quite old now, but these are self-reported statistics on the left-hand side. The second layer, if you like, or tier of activity were wellbeing coordinators. And I've seen this just now in Doncaster. They're actually called wellbeing workers, and they sit in the council actually. They don't have a restriction on how long they work with people. So the wellbeing coordinators in our patch were hosted by Age UK. They're now funded by the NHS. They're not quite the same as the R's social prescribing roles, and we still haven't quite resolved that one yet. But their motto is, it's as many cups of tea as it takes to build a relationship of trust. And between these two workers who do things very differently. So what we discovered was these guys, like, if you've got casework, you soon get full because there's plenty of needs out there. You can't do the building, the empowering, the enabling, the connecting of people in community, in neighbourhoods, without a bit of resource and support to enable that to happen, particularly in areas that maybe lack the same degree of social capital. So these guys do all of that. When they come across someone who might need some more one-to-one support, they will then introduce them in person to the wellbeing coordinator. If a wellbeing coordinator starts working with someone and that person then feels ready to engage and connect, and often it's not about groups. People think like the solution to these things is groups. It's not. Friendship is more important. Sometimes people don't want to join groups, they don't want activities, they want friendship. So we were looking at all sorts of different ways to foster these sort of different layers of connectivity around how people wanted to be with each other. We had one group of ladies who all thought they were there to help the other people. The only way we could get them to engage was to ask them to help. That is a really key bit of learning. Sometimes people don't like charity, and often actually by helping others, we actually help ourselves, and that's what I experienced and will experience again in a minute with the community wardens at PFG in Doncaster. Tim was suicidal. He's now living his best life. We helped him move into the centre of Paynton and so on, and that's the story there for you to have a look at. So then lockdown came. We couldn't do all of this amazing face-to-face work. I should have explained at the beginning that this partnership involved all of the statutory partners as well. We had real support and connection from local foundation trusts, from the council, and other partners. But it was primarily all happening out in community. So we created a community helpline. It launched on the 16th of March with a strap line, one call, that's all. Because the thing we learned more than anything is that signposting doesn't work for the people that need it the most. So this was kind of all of that mutual self-help stuff that happened in lockdown in most places across the country, and lots of places are now lamenting how they didn't sort of harness that and nurture it to carry on. In Torbay, we incorporated it all into one ecosystem of support. And this was the scheme. Here's some stats. I mean, these are way out of date now. I mean, these figures are huge now. But we had neighbourly stuff going on, neighbours supporting neighbours. We're not doing DBS, they're not volunteers. It's two personal references, and we connect people to make the arrangements between themselves as consenting adults. We've had no issues of safeguarding or risk within this, and it's been running now for 5 years. We're connected into all the food bank systems, social supermarkets. We're doing home from hospital where there's no care needs. We've got high intensity user stuff helping people going into ED as well. This is what we call the more formal support, where we've got networks sitting behind these. So we deliberately spent time networking up our community and voluntary sector and connecting them with statutory as well. So one of the things, I suppose, in the sort of service layer was about, well, how do we actually get things a bit more coordinated, a bit more joined up to be able to support the people in the neighbourhoods? And this ecosystem, it's not perfect, it's still evolving, but there is a CRM system in the middle for the bulk of the heavy hitters, which are currently neighbourliness, 25% of need met, wellbeing coordination, individual casework, motivational in-tune coaching, 25%, direct mental health support, 25%, cost of living, 25%. I suspect it'd probably be similar in most places. So this was really successful. This was part of the whole COVID response in Torbay. These are some of the networks that were formed, some in COVID, some prior, but we nurtured the networks. And there's probably some actually even better examples of nurturing grassroots work that Matt's led in Plymouth, which we cite in a paper that I'll show you a link to in a minute. So I guess this seems quite appropriate, and thanks to Cormac for this image. Do we really need a helicopter to walk a dog? You know, we're adults, you know, we're human beings, we're very capable and adaptable creatures. Betty, who I met 2 days ago, who did her round, would not want me to be going, oh, but Betty, I'm not sure that you can cope with this. You know, actually, she can make the decisions about what she can cope with and what she would like to offer to her local community. So all of that kind of led to us being commissioned by Partners in Care and Health. And back in March last year, we worked with Barking and Dagenham, North Yorkshire and Kirklees councils. We took learning from Leeds, from Plymouth, from Torbay, and from a number of other writers and advocates of different ways of working. We looked at human learning systems. We were very much influenced, although we didn't realise it, by Hilary Cotham's Radical Help. And we came up with this layer cake model, as we call it, as a way that any area could kind of utilise these principles. So this is all in those sort of published links with much more detail and links to lots of other learning and approaches. So it didn't just take from the Torbay journey, it took from lots of other people. So in some places, we used asset-based community development. I still think that's the best example I've seen of a way of nurturing neighbourhoods of care, because it's got that very strong philosophy of kind of really putting relationships first, building on the strengths and what's strong in a community. It's the art of the possible rather than about managing scarcity. It's about connecting all of the resources in a place. It's about doing it all together, because if we co-own it, we're gonna want it to achieve. We've got a shared purpose together. We think actually Probably the most important bit of this, and this comes partly from Hilary Cottam. So these are her 6 principles with a bit of tweaking. She talked about the importance of being able to build people's capability. Often, actually, everything's stacked against you, whether it be the benefit system, the high rent, the way in which the care is being commissioned or delivered, or whatever. Or the physical aspects of a place if you have disabilities and so on. But we also found a wonderful case study, which was Healthier Fleetwood. That's a new local case study. Doctor, GP, who started to work with people in Fleetwood and focused in a very much a community, like a bit like ABCD, community development way, around focusing on building connection, confidence, and sense of control of our lives, our health, our community. And that has now become an outlier. So when you're looking at the kind of the major drivers and spend in the health system, so people generally say that the ED is the most expensive bit of that. You may prove me wrong, but in Fleetwood they're an outlier because everywhere around that, with same population dynamics, has about a +4% increase in demand year on year. Fleetwood is now -20%. So by focusing on connection, confidence, capability and control for residents, which I think could be a guiding principle for neighbourhoods of care, we think actually is everyone is focused on that. If that's the single purpose, we will get to a place where people get to lead their best lives in a flourishing community. I don't think I need to go into these slides because they're Simon's slides, and you're probably going to discuss this more anyway. But what this was us starting together, co-producing some of what this might look like together. And I just want to say a huge thank you for the opportunity to be part of that, and a complete commitment from us to be part of that journey of helping to create it in the future, because it feels to us like it's definitely the way forward. So that's me. Thank you very much indeed.
Brilliant, Simon. Thank you so much. So I guess it's how long have we got? We've got 25 minutes, I think. That was very inspiring, very helpful, very clear. But I think it is an opportunity for everybody to ask questions. So if anybody wants to put their hand up or just shout out, even. Is it all? I'll throw in one then while people think. But my questions are like a bit of a strategic one, really, because we've been battering it about between us. I've been musing on what we do to take this thinking forward politically, but in a bit of every sense. So it's I mean, historically with self-directed support, we got a lot of value in a way out of branding it. We created something called In Control. We in a way created a kind of operating system that we published, and it was as a kind of proliferation strategy. It definitely had a positive impact, and I benefited from working with my friend Carl Pole on some of this. But I'm kind of a bit nervous of doing that with this because it seems to me so much bigger in a funny way. It needs to be so much more permissive. And so what I've tended to do is think that the two words neighbourhood care, kind of smushing them together and then trying to create actually legitimacy for that without anybody trying to own it, might be the way forward. Try and make this, so I don't know, like it might be I might be wrong about this. I'm really interested in everybody's perspective, and if they think this is a way forward, and it's not as if people haven't been talking about asset-based community development for donkey's years, and there are elements of this which have been around, haven't they? I mean, I think we all know that, and there's nothing here that's anybody's saying that's totally new. but we've somehow not been able to kind of resist the neoliberal commissioning arc that began in the early 90s. And maybe I feel like there is something changing, because I like friends like Wendy Lauder in Barnsley, who retires at 60. She gets to retire from this work. I just kind of can't believe that, with a proper pension. But, you know, these people, you know, they've lived through the decades of system change, and they can provide great system leadership, partially because they've seen the failures of these systems, and they're not, you know, when you're young, it's difficult to resist the mood music. And I remember being young when kind of these changes happened in the early 90s, and everybody was saying this is the future, commissioning, procurement, contracting, and I was going, oh well, maybe we could do it a bit different to that. But like really the tsunami of change that unleashed was enormous. So I think something's changing, because I think people are kind of waking up and going, no, this really didn't work, and we're ready for a change. But I'm a bit nervous of a kind of, I don't know, like, here's the next sexy model, or here's the brand, or because I kind of feel we need to create a more inclusive approach. We don't want to push this up on government, because we know they're the last people to get this. That's my experience with self-directed support. It was just a head-banging experience going on the train to Whitehall all the time to talk about this stuff. And I certainly don't have the years left in me to repeat that. I want to kind of see a community growth of these ideas. But I do think the language we use, the communities we build, I mean, it's the lessons you've really just talked about, Simon. They're important too. So, like, we know that people get confidence when they hear about other people doing it. We know that models can be helpful in picturing things. We know that the language we use tends to be important in getting resonance. So I don't know, I'd be interested in people's perspective on, like, what would feel helpful at this point in this emerging story of neighbourhood care. Anybody really, Simon maybe, and Matt, because you're thinking about this, but really any of us, we've all got this challenge, and we're all conscious. Matt? Oh, is he not? Is there another hand?
I think Stephen's before me.
And
Sorry.
I think Suzanne had a question. We might link into that, Simon, because Suzanne's asking how much financial resource was required to invest in building the system.
In the example I gave. So we had £1 million a year, which we don't have anymore, but actually it's all still there. So even though the money's gone, I mean, it's a number of different pots of money. So social care put in some, there's a bit of health money, there's some lottery funding, there's a lot of community energy. The community builder bit was about £500,000, thereabouts. I mean, there are other ways of doing it. So some places have used community anchors. So where you've got established local groups, in Kirklees, they had different levels of community anchors. So in Huddersfield, for example, I mean, I went to a really local Christian-based community centre who were doing all that mutual self-help stuff. They had a WhatsApp group with over 100 residents on it. Social care practitioners were using it, but the system wasn't resourcing it, really. You know, we could use the system thing. The thing I didn't mention in our journey was also, given that there's a title of commissioning, and as an ex-commissioner, I was frustrated by some of the inadequacies of commissioning when I was in local government. So one of the things we tested was collaborative commissioning. And since then, there have been other things like alliance commissioning and so on and so on, which I think is a really good model in principle. Collaborative commissioning, we did that of advice agencies in the voluntary sector. And I think what I can tell you, because the journey's gone on for long enough, so that was using a small pot of money actually to add to, so we weren't commissioning all the advice delivered by Age UK and CAB and so on. We did a collaborative piece, which was about trying to foster collaboration. So we actually built it into the tender programme with the advice of the local authority. And we said, we're looking for collaboration. We want to foster collaboration amongst voluntary sector agencies who are currently delivering financial advice and support to people in Torbay. So we restricted it, but it was all an open procurement and all that's legal and fine. We ended up with one collaborative led by CAB, but because it's been going on now for probably 7-8 years, I mean, that money was just a 2-year thing, but they've started to build relationships with each other. Our commission was also based on us talking to older people first. So they said, we don't know about all these things like CAB and these service centres and Age UK. We don't know about it. We think we're part of the solution, they told us. Train us, they said. So that's what we did. CAB trained them in benefits level 1 and 2, and in the first year, £1 million of unclaimed PIP. And they went out back into their neighbourhoods. So it's another example. You can use your commissioning powers to get different organisations to work together collaboratively into an area or a space or a number of neighbourhoods. But the added value is that partnership in lockdown doubled in size from 9 to 18. They've now secured partnership funding from the lottery. They've been commissioned now as a partnership entity by social care. So if you keep nurturing and building it, it grows. I think one of the problems is we've just got short-termism all the time, isn't it? And that's the problem that we might describe in the system. You know, health, 1-year funding, you know, lots of stuff is short-term with a bit of extra money that was somewhere here. Oh, we'll do a bit of prevention with it. We need to make this kind of the reason why we're doing stuff and the core, part of the core solid base of budgets. So you almost, I think we need to turn it on its head and start, right, how do we support neighbourhood? And then reconstruct our budget lines to support that. So complete inverse of what we currently do. Sorry, I waffled on a bit there. Stephen.
So forgive me, because this is a collection of kind of thoughts rather than something that's coherent. But there's something in it for me, that point you were asking, Simon, about the kind of the ownership of this and the kind of sense of a kind of movement and neighbourhood care as a kind of term we can get behind. There's one of the things that's kind of been frustrating me for a while. So there's two things actually. One is the lack of a kind of consistent methodology or model on this. One of the things that frustrates me in Essex is, you know, it's social prescribing and it's community connectors and it's community builders and it's care navigators and it's, you know, there's like 50 different things that are all going, none of which work together, all of which are imposed on a community, and none of it kind of really makes, you know, they do little bits, but there's nothing coherent about it. So there's kind of that element of it that, and it's all kind of short-term funded, and then it comes and does a little bit and then disappears. And then the other bit is around this kind of innate sense that the system is kind of pushing towards the status quo or pulling towards the status quo constantly. So anything that's kind of new and innovative gets tested to within an inch of its life, and it's all about how much money is it saving rather than what good is it doing. Whereas, you know, we never test dom care, we never test residential, we never test day services for their efficiencies, their value added, or their savings that they bring to the system. So there's something about those two things that we need to kind of work on. For me, that we need to work on, we need to crack if we're going to do this, and we're going to do it well, and we're going to do it properly. And it sounds like you cracked a lot of those things, Simon. But there's something in that. If we're trying to do this kind of across the nation, and we're trying to, yes, we need to do it at a community level, but there is something about, if we want the system to get behind it, we need to find some way of stripping out all that nonsense. That, like I say, it's not a coherent thought. It's just the kind of series of kind of things that are going on in my mind as you were talking.
Yeah, I think there's definitely something for me about we were very purposeful. So because our vision was bringing people together, doesn't matter whether from agency, citizen, whatever, and it's holding you to a set of principles, I think, is the bit that's missing for me often.
Yeah.
So the layers were one way of sort of trying to, you know, different levels of coming together, but the principles, and holding to that. So how do you knit it together? I mean, when ours role started, or link workers, we tried desperately to get those guys to be part of the existing wellbeing coordinator team. But the NHS wouldn't pay for overheads. So CAB said, well, we're not hosting them. So they got handed back, caused a massive problem. They still interact into that, but we're doubling it. So they're kind of like, we've got handoffs now in the system.
Yeah. And I think the thing, going back to that kind of model, is like, there's Birdsong, there's local area coordination. There's a ton of models that are out there. And I think the point that was resonating with me, Simon, was that they're kind of owned by people or organizations that are kind of trying to push that as this is the model. And how do we kind of get to that? What, as you say, what are the core principles that we just all need to do, and people to lose some of that? And I get it, because it's a competitive, we've created that competitive marketplace, so people are having to push. Community catalysts is the answer, local area coordination is the answer, you know what I mean? It's Birdsong is the answer, so get away from that kind of simplicity that or is it that if an area just needs to go, right, this is what the model we're going to use, and we're all going to believe in it, and we're all going to invest in it, and our community gets it, and our community believes in it, or is it that we need a kind of just an overarching set of principles that we all get behind, and we all kind of utilize and let go of some of those barriers that we're creating around our ideas?
I even think that the conversations about principles are going to be really important. And we won't identify the final set. That's almost like a little bit, like, I just think I put it like a jocular thing in the chat, but like, let's all plant geraniums is a bit like, let's all do this.
Yeah.
Right? But if our gardens were full of geraniums and that was the only thing we did, there'd be terrible gardens. Right. Yeah. And like, if we can just lift ourselves up and think, well, Essex has its own beauty, and its neighbourhoods will have their own beauty, and they'll all be diverse from each other. And that's a good thing. Like, actually, if we just start appreciating the beauty of difference, and we start thinking about our own roles in a different way, what do we really want, in a way? I think, and then I think we can start to. So we should want the, like, I don't know, who knows what's going to happen to poor local government, but let's, we've got local government, 150 local authorities responsible for social services. We want them all to be different. But we want them all to be great gardeners. We want them all to be figuring out what their culture is. And we want them learning within the network neighbourhoods and between each other in these kind of commissioning conversations. So I really dream of a world, Stephen, where we don't think like Essex won, or we just go, that stuff they're doing down in Essex is really cool. What could we learn from that? Like, I love gardening, actually, and I love every time I go to a garden, something inspires me. That's what I want this to be like. I don't know, I might be dreaming, but what I noticed is, like, the kind of questions you're asking, they get sharper and sharper as you go up the tree. So when you get into Westminster and stuff, they want something usually very shallow, because they're not actually serious about social change. They want some label that they can give something, some formulaic thing that they're gonna. This is what really maddened me about self-directed support. Sorry, but we were doing this stuff basically local authority by local authority, and the local authorities were leading it. And then somehow, in the process that we won, putting people first and Ivan Lewis and the whole thing becoming official government policy, we lost. Because then the system was telling people who'd actually done the work how to do stuff that the system didn't know how to do. Yeah. And I would really worry about us repeating that massive mistake. So, like in South Yorkshire, actually at the same time, I at the end of last year, towards the end of the year, Sheffield wobbled about coming in, and then I sat down with Greg Fell, the Director of Public Health, and we went over it. He went, "Oh yeah, I get it. Yeah, all right." Because what he was frightened of was that this structure would tell Sheffield what to do, and Sheffield don't like to be told what to do by anybody, but they certainly don't want to be told what to do by Doncaster or Barnsley or me. Yeah, and quite right. It's a proud city. It's got its own history. It's got its own governance.
But that's the same for people, isn't it? In communities, Simon. So if you apply that principle, but start in the neighbourhood and build up from it or down from it, whatever language you want, the answers will come as to which bits of models you want to pick and mix from, rather than saying it has to be this, that, or the other. It's got to come from the people. We've got to trust them. They know their communities and they can build the kind of neighbourhood of care that they want.
And I guess I'm not, this is the thing I was saying, I'm not expressing it very clearly, but there's something about complexity, is that when we do stuff, we just keep adding layers on rather than stripping away the layers that actually help people. You know, so we just create more governance and we create more structures and we create more confusion of, like, so people don't know where the hell to go to. You know what I mean? What do we go to that person for and what do we go to that person for, rather than just do it. You know what I mean? You're free. Go on, get on, and make this happen. And I guess that's the bit that kind of frustrates me. There's a very kind of top-down NHS. You must do social prescribing, and then somebody else. You know, it's all those kind of things that just are not particularly helping people. They're just the example I'll use is, so a colleague of mine. We've been doing community micro enterprise. So we've been kind of working with people in the community that want to set up their own businesses and that kind of stuff, helping them do that, creating their own support organisations. And so my colleague was sitting in the community hub, and there was the social prescribing team, there was the care navigator team, blah blah blah. All these kind of teams were all in this community hub. And this poor gentleman came in. He was new to the area. He couldn't read or write very well. He had a form that he needed to fill in the GP. He was on medication that kept him alive, and his medication was running out, and he had no GP, and so he needed to get a GP so he could get his medication. And he went around all these different teams, and none of them were able to help him. All they would do was signpost him to somewhere else, right? Whereas actually my colleague just went, as a human being, come here, right? She's not English herself. She didn't speak English as her first language, but she just kind of did it and filled in the form with them, and off he went, and he got and helped him phone the GP with them and blah blah blah, and got it all sorted, and he got his GP. But it's like all these stuff that were created to help this situation is actively not helping the situation, because they're kind of, the structures are getting in the way of, no, we only do this bit because that's their job, and that's, you know, rather than actually how do we just help people to get create the things that they need at the time when they need them.
I guess
it's because we've only got 5 minutes.
Sorry.
No, that's a really, really important point, Stephen. Don't apologise. But Matt, I think you.
I guess I've been thinking about this for years in terms of what's getting in the way. You know, what's getting in the way of the conversation around prevention? What's getting in the way? You know, because even so if we broaden out from just maybe thinking about statutory provision and the kind of formation of networks of neighbourhoods, when we look at the way that grant funding comes out, it's got just as many flaws within its basic thinking, and I guess I'd invite us to kind of actually go quite deep in thinking about where this all comes from. I think there's an inherent tendency in all of us to want to control someone else. So, you know, a lot of our kind of teamwork and collaboration, a lot of it is about kind of creating the space to be able to listen, in order to be able to understand someone else, in order that you don't default to, I'd quite like them just to kind of see the world in the way that I see it. Now, I think that's supernatural, and that's kind of part of who we are. When you look at the underlying kind of frameworks that we exist in, what then happens is that we've written that way of working into our employment law, into most of our legal system, obviously into our criminal justice system. That's kind of like what it's built for. And so I think it's a really deep issue that we're facing, where it's basically, we make the assumption that people cannot self-organize. We make the assumption that we have to have another group of people telling us what to do. Now, obviously, that gets really complex in organizations because you've got multiple layers of all this happening all at the same time. But basically, the underlying premise is, I know better than you. And that comes from, you know, inherent nature of who we are, but also supremacy and supremacist thinking. It's like, I know more than you, I know better than you, and therefore I want to exploit you. And so all of this is really quite deep. So when we start thinking about, well, okay, well, how do we make a shift around this? I think we need to start in our immediate, well, first of all, personally, like, what beliefs do I carry that make me think that I know better than someone else? So that, and that kind of gets quite vulnerable as a kind of process, because you suddenly realize actually maybe you carry quite a lot of that stuff. But then also in our immediate teams and our immediate relationships, like how do we use our own power? Like, so if we got positional power, how are we aware of all of that? Because unless we start unpicking that, I think that's why we don't get the kind of agreement of personal budgets, because the assumption is that that person doesn't know how to use that money, because they need an expert or someone else to be able to tell them what to do. Even despite the evidence, despite everything that we're looking at, that shows us that the opposite is in fact true. So I think it's quite a deep thing, and therefore I think one of the biggest challenges for us all collectively is to think about, well, how do we organize around this sort of stuff? How do I inhabit my power? How do I reveal my power to others? And how do I reveal the rules that write in this power gradient to what we do? Not necessarily we can't change all those rules, but we can certainly reveal them to ourselves and to others, as to say, oh well, actually, you know, we exist in this. Do we want to exist in this environment? And I think it goes quite deep.
And on that bombshell, though, we are at 11 o'clock. But so I don't know. Like, I'm tempted to carry on the conversation because it is, in a way, the most profound conversation. But I also like finishing meetings on time. Claire, how are you feeling?
Same. It's been really interesting. It's really inspiring to hear Simon talk about what's been happening. I'm doing the meeting that Ian's just left for. But yeah, so really inspiring, and yeah, lots to go away and think about.
Well, to Matt and Simon, I'd say this framework is an open framework, which is free and is facilitated for free by Claire and Chris, is here for us to carry on this conversation. And of course, we'll keep working together as well. So some of those deeper questions we'll need to find some answers for, but if there are answers. But I just, again, thank you so much, everybody coming and coming on this journey with us as well, where not all the answers are known. The model is not given, but there's a lot of creative work we can do together. So I don't know, Claire or Chris, did you want to say anything to finish?
I guess it's coming together is really great, isn't it? Because it's about then kind of hearing what else is happening around the country, and you can, these conversations can carry on outside of this meeting as well, can't they? So, you know, we can connect people up. Simon S, the attachment that you sent is in your SharePoint. So if you want to email that to me or Chris, then we can share that with the slides to the rest of the group. So they've got both of those things. But yeah, people feel free to continue to talk outside of this meeting as well. And the next meeting is on the 25th of April. At 9:30 again. So,
Thanks,
but yes, thank you for
all.
joining us. Nice to see everybody, and thank you, Simon S.